Michael Thompson was a man who thrived on predictability. Since his college days, life had followed a familiar rhythm, especially after he met Lily, a fellow student who was deeply passionate about photography. They quickly bonded over shared dreams, even though their paths eventually diverged. Michael launched a small graphic design business in Greenwood, while Lily pursued her art career. Despite their different pursuits, their marriage seemed solid, and they supported each other as they built a life together. Their joy reached new heights with the birth of their daughter, Sophie, who became the center of their world. But as the years passed, subtle cracks began to form in their relationship. Conversations grew shorter, and the connection they once cherished started to weaken. Michael noticed the changes, but was too caught up in his work to address them until Lily's distant behavior became too glaring to ignore. For the past few months, he found himself sitting at his desk, struggling with thoughts of what had gone wrong. His wife of 6 years had been acting strangely ever since the new year, seeming preoccupied and distant. Their once meaningful conversations had dwindled into brief, almost mechanical exchanges, and Lily's constant reassurances that nothing was wrong only deepened his frustration. Determined to get to the bottom of it, he decided he would confront her that night. The growing distance between them had also taken a toll on their intimacy. What was once a vibrant part of their lives had nearly vanished. Lily had started attending evening photography workshops about 6 months ago, and Michael noticed that they were running later and later. On other nights, she would spend hours editing photos, leaving Michael to care for Sophie alone. During these long evenings, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Twice, he checked in on Lily at the community center where the workshops were held, but each time he found nothing unusual. She was always exactly where she said she'd be, focused on her art. As Michael sat there, struggling with how to fix something he couldn't even confirm was broken, his new assistant, Rachel, walked into his office. "Michael, Lily's on the phone," she said. Rachel, a recent hire, had quickly become indispensable by efficiently handling customer service and administrative tasks, allowing Michael to focus on the business side of things. With the post-holiday slump coming to an end, he appreciated her help even more. Michael picked up the phone. "Hi, Lily. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Michael," Lily replied, her voice cool. "I just wanted to check if you'll be home at the usual time tonight." "Yes, I should be," Michael assured her, glancing at the clock. "Rachel's got everything under control here." "Good," Lily said, her tone still distant. "I need to talk to you. I'll see you at 6 o'clock." "Okay, see you then." "Love you," Michael said, but she had already hung up. He stared at the phone, troubled by how quickly she had ended the call. Just a few months ago, they would have chatted and joked over the phone, but now, she seemed so far away. Michael picked up a photo from his desk, one from their vacation last year in Maine. They were standing on the beach, smiling with their arms around each other. He remembered how wonderful their first 5 years of marriage had been, full of adventures and romance. But their once passionate connection had faded, and he couldn't understand why. He hoped that tonight he might finally get some answers. The ringing phone jolted Michael from his thoughts. After handling the call, he returned to work, deciding to deal with his problems with Lily later. Just before closing time, Rachel and David, his only other employee, walked into his office. Rachel mentioned a rush job that needed to be completed by morning, but Michael couldn't stay late. Reluctantly, David agreed to work overtime. Michael quickly packed up, eager to get home and talk to Lily. Arriving home earlier than usual, Michael walked into the kitchen and found Lily staring blankly out the window. When he greeted her and tried to kiss her, she turned away. "Please, Michael, don't," she said quietly. "I need to talk to you." Confused, Michael followed her into the living room. She sat down on the edge of the couch and, after a long pause, said, "Michael, I'm leaving you." "No, I'm divorcing you." Stunned, Michael could only manage. "What? How can you say that?" Lily took a deep breath and explained, "During my photography course, I realized that I've fallen in love with James, my instructor. We connect in a way that I never thought possible. James is moving to Paris at the end of the year, and I want to go with him, as his wife. I need the divorce finalized before then." "You're talking about James Walker, your instructor?" Michael asked in disbelief. Lily nodded, still not meeting his gaze. "Yes, Michael. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen, but it has. Michael sat there in silence, his mind racing through the years they had spent together, the love they had shared, and the future he had imagined. He wanted to argue, to beg her to reconsider, but deep down, he knew that nothing he said would change her mind. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. Lily stood up slowly. I'll have my lawyer send the papers on Monday. I'm leaving now. Sophie is with my parents. They'll bring her home around 7 o'clock. Michael wiped away the tears that had begun to form and followed her to the front hall. He watched as she picked up her suitcases and walked out the door. At the bottom of the stairs, James Walker appeared, took one of the suitcases, and gave Michael a smug look. Lily didn't look back as they drove away. Michael closed the door and collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down his face as he replayed the evening's events over and over in his mind. Time passed in a blur until the doorbell rang. For a fleeting moment, he hoped it was Lily returning, but it was her father, Tom Hudson, who stepped inside. I see she told you, Tom said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I can't believe she's doing this. Tom's wife, Martha, and their other daughter, Kate, followed him inside, carrying Sophie and her things. Their faces were marked with the pain of a family torn apart. Sophie, however, remained blissfully unaware of the heartbreak around her. Michael stood, and they all hugged him, offering comfort in the only way they could. With no siblings and his parents long gone, the Hudson family was all he had. They sat together, trying to make sense of what had happened, though none of them could truly comprehend it. Tears flowed again as they shared their disbelief. Around 7:30, Martha suggested they find something to eat, and she and Tom went to the kitchen to prepare sandwiches. Kate handed Sophie to Michael, who let his daughter play in his lap, even as she tugged at his hair, bringing a faint smile to his face despite everything. Sophie's laughter provided a brief but much-needed escape from the sorrow that had gripped Michael's heart. Soon, they all gathered around the coffee table to eat. Michael wasn't particularly hungry, but he ate anyway, grateful for the company. As they ate, he observed the Hudson family. Tom and Martha, both retired but still active, and Kate, a 16-year-old with braces and a shy smile. After the meal, Sophie entertained everyone by standing at the coffee table and trying to grab the plates, her playful antics lifting their spirits. By 8:30, Kate volunteered to get Sophie ready for bed while Michael, Tom, and Martha discussed the logistics of balancing work and childcare. They concluded that Michael would need to arrange for daycare, but Martha offered to help in the meantime. Michael planned to take the next day off to sort things out. When Kate returned, she reported that Sophie was asleep, and Michael thanked her for her help. After some more conversation, the Hudson family decided it was time to leave. Michael expressed his gratitude and locked the door behind them. He checked on Sophie, who was sound asleep, then poured himself a stiff drink to steady his nerves. As he sipped his whiskey, the sadness he had felt earlier began to give way to anger. Lily had shattered his world, and he vowed not to make things easy for her. Michael headed upstairs to the master bedroom and flicked on the light. It was the first time he'd been there since Lily left, and he immediately noticed the empty closet and the bare vanity. The attached bathroom was also devoid of her things. Turning off the light, he collapsed onto the bed, tears welling up again as he felt the void left in her absence. Lily was gone, and although he doubted he could ever win her back, he felt he had to try. Eventually, the alcohol took effect, and he drifted into a restless sleep, still fully dressed. He woke early the next morning, took a long, hot shower, and forced himself to go through his usual routine, even though the thought of living without Lily weighed heavily on him. After checking on Sophie, still asleep with her teddy bear, he kissed her cheek and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. He made coffee, found some cereal for both himself and Sophie, and ate despite having no appetite. His thoughts kept drifting back to Lily, but he knew he needed to stay focused. Michael brought out his briefcase and did some work at the kitchen table until he heard Sophie waking. After changing and dressing her, he fed her breakfast. When Sophie realized it was her father feeding her and not Lily, she began to cry, and Michael struggled to calm her down. Eventually, he managed to distract her with a toy, and she settled. He called the office and left a message for Rachel, asking her to contact him. When she called back, he explained that he'd be working from home for most of the day, but would stop by the office later. He didn't mention what had happened at home. Soon after, Martha arrived to care for Sophie while Michael finished his work. By 10 o'clock, he joined Martha and Sophie in the living room. Martha noticed how exhausted Michael looked and commented on it. Michael admitted he'd slept poorly, aided only by whiskey, but was determined to push through for Sophie's sake. He even confessed that he might consider taking Lily back for Sophie's benefit, though he suspected Lily had already moved on. Martha hesitated before revealing something Michael hadn't expected. She said Lily had confided in her that she had been physically involved with James over the past 2 weeks, which explained her growing distance. However, Martha reassured Michael that Lily had also mentioned that Michael had always been the more considerate partner and that her decision wasn't based on dissatisfaction. Although Michael appreciated the clarification, he doubted it would make any difference in Lily's decision. Determined to distract himself with work, Michael decided to head to the office, refusing to let his business fall apart as well. He kissed Sophie, who proudly stood by the sofa and waved goodbye, just as she had many times before. He reminded himself that his top priority was making sure Sophie came through this ordeal unscathed. When he arrived at the office, Rachel was busy on the phone, so Michael went straight to his desk, needing a moment to compose himself after the emotional drive. Once settled, he handed Rachel the files he'd completed at home. Noticing her concerned look, he decided it was time to explain the situation to her. When Rachel entered his office, he asked her to close the door and take a seat. It was difficult for him, but eventually, he said, "Rachel, I'm dealing with a serious situation at home. My wife left me last night, but she didn't take our daughter. I've suddenly become a single parent." Rachel, though surprised, listened attentively. "You've only been here 2 weeks, but you've already shown great competence," Michael continued. "I'd like to promote you to office manager with a $1.50 raise. We can review how things are going in a month." Rachel was taken aback, but accepted the offer, assuring Michael that she was up for the challenge, especially with the added pay. Michael expressed his confidence in her abilities, explaining that he needed her help as he balanced work and caring for Sophie. Afterward, he shared the news with David, who offered his support. Michael worked until mid-afternoon before heading home with files to finish. He asked Rachel to call him if any issues arose, assuring her that he trusted her decisions. At home, Martha told Michael that Sophie had fussed for her mother at lunch, but eventually calmed down. Michael set up his den to work, realizing that he needed better equipment for working from home. The afternoon passed quickly, and by 4:30, he wrapped up his work. Martha, who had started dinner, mentioned that she had a prior commitment over the weekend and suggested that Kate help with Sophie. Michael agreed, grateful for the support. After Martha left, Michael fed Sophie dinner, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the chaos around them. Sophie cried for her mom again, but Michael managed to divert her attention with her favorite toy. The evening passed quietly after that, and once Sophie was bathed and tucked in a bed, Michael poured himself another glass of bourbon and sat in silence, his mind circling back to thoughts of Lily. It wasn't until close to midnight that he finally dragged himself to bed. On Monday, February 4th, Michael woke up early, thinking over the weekend that had just passed. Grace had come over on Saturday and took on most of the responsibility of looking after Sophie, allowing Michael to focus on turning his den into a fully functional office. By midday Sunday, he had set up his new workspace, and he spent the rest of the day with Sophie and Grace at the local park. Although Sophie threw a couple of tantrums, Grace handled her well, keeping her busy and calm. Martha picked Grace up on Sunday evening, promising to come back Monday morning. She arrived right on time at 8:30, and Michael left for the office. The morning was hectic until Rachel brought him a courier envelope from a law firm. She handed it to Michael, her face full of concern. He hesitated before tearing it open and pulling out the documents. They were the divorce papers, outlining the terms Lily had agreed to, including the arrangements for her time with Sophie. Feeling a heavy weight settle on his chest, Michael slipped the papers into his briefcase. He knew he needed to call his lawyer, but the thought of dealing with it sapped his energy. The idea of facing Lily again on Wednesday filled him with dread, fearing it would feel like losing her all over again. Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur, but on Wednesday morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual, determined to be out of the house as soon as Lily arrived. When the doorbell rang at 8:30, he steeled himself. Lily was facing away, looking out at the street when he opened the door, so he kept it short. "Come in. Sophie's still asleep. I'm heading out now." He grabbed his briefcase from the kitchen and slipped out the side door, relieved that he didn't have to speak with her. He wasn't sure he could keep it together. Wednesday dragged on, feeling like the longest day of Michael's life. His thoughts kept returning to the fact that Lily was at home, in what had been their shared space, with Sophie. By the time he returned, the emotional wound had reopened. He fought back tears more than once, wondering if he should seek help for his depression. At 4:30, he called the house. "I'll be home around 5 o'clock, he told Lily. "Please be gone by then. I'll come in through the side door. I don't want to see you today." "All right," Lily responded, her voice devoid of emotion. When Michael got home, he heard Lily leaving through the front door as he entered through the side. He watched from the window as she drove away without looking back. Dinner was a disaster. Michael could barely touch his food, and Sophie, after finishing her meal, began wailing for her mother. Nothing he did could calm her down, and her crying grew so intense that she struggled to breathe. Feeling desperate and heartbroken, Michael finally managed to soothe her, gave her a bath, and put her to bed. He stayed by her side until she drifted off to sleep. That night, Michael followed his now familiar routine of pouring a drink and sinking into deep thought, staying up until nearly 2 a.m. He knew he had to take control of the situation, for both his and Sophie's sake. He resolved to contact his lawyer first thing on Thursday. On Thursday morning, Michael called his lawyer, Jim Watson, and scheduled an afternoon appointment. At 2 p.m., he handed Jim the documents from Lily's lawyer. Jim looked them over and noted that the terms were surprisingly favorable, with no demands for alimony or child support. Michael acknowledged this, but was adamant about making changes. He wanted Lily to relinquish all parental rights, avoid any contact with Sophie or him, and sign a legally binding agreement to stay at least 500 feet away. Michael made it clear that he was prepared to fight the divorce if she didn't agree to these terms. Jim was doubtful, but agreed to draft the letter, warning Michael that Lily might not accept such strict conditions. Michael returned to work with a renewed sense of resolve, feeling better now that he had taken action. The rest of the week passed without incident, and Michael decided to repeat the weekend arrangement with Grace, which had gone smoothly before. Grace agreed, and they spent another good weekend together. This time, she brought along some homework, and Michael helped her with her geometry and algebra assignments while Sophie napped, a fair exchange for her babysitting. On Tuesday, February 12th, Michael began his week with a new routine he had established. He worked from home, connected to the office via his new computer setup. Rachel managed the office efficiently, rarely needing his input. Business had picked up, and all 3 employees were kept busy. Just before noon, Michael received a call from Jim, asking him to come in for a 2 p.m. meeting. When Michael arrived, Jim greeted him with a grin. "I don't know how you managed it, but Lily agreed to everything. I've never seen a divorce settled this fast with such strict conditions. Her lawyer will send over the signed documents later today. Once you sign, we'll get your copies out to you." Michael was stunned but relieved. After signing the papers, he left the office early, telling Rachel he would be working from home for the rest of the day, possibly the rest of the week. Working from home went well on Tuesday, but the following days were a challenge. Michael tried to juggle both work and parenting on his own, but the demands of taking care of Sophie often interrupted his work. By Friday evening, after putting Sophie to bed, Michael poured himself another bourbon and realized he needed a better plan. The solution seemed obvious. He would visit his in-laws over the weekend to discuss his idea. After breakfast on Saturday, he called Martha, and they arranged to meet at 2 p.m. Martha invited Michael and Sophie to stay for dinner, and Michael was happy to accept. As soon as they arrived, Grace took charge of Sophie, which fit perfectly with Michael's plan. He joined Tom and Martha in the living room and shared the latest developments, including Lily's decision to relinquish her parental rights. Both Tom and Martha were stunned, but understood Michael's reasoning. Michael then proposed an idea he had been considering: having Grace move in to help care for Sophie after school, which would allow him to spend more time at the office in the evenings. He explained that his growing business required more of his attention, and he was willing to compensate Grace for her help. This arrangement would also give Tom and Martha the freedom to travel, something they had been eager to do. Michael emphasized that they should discuss the idea with Grace and make a decision soon. Martha agreed that it was a promising plan and suggested they talk it over with Grace after dinner and give Michael an answer the next day. Everyone agreed, and they moved on to lighter topics for the rest of the evening. After a pleasant visit, Michael and Sophie returned home, spending a quiet Saturday night together. On Sunday morning, as expected, Michael received a call from Martha. She informed him that Grace was excited about the idea, and both she and Tom agreed it could work. Since there was some urgency to the situation, Tom offered to come over that afternoon to help set up Grace's room. When Tom arrived, Michael showed him around the house. The master bedroom and bath were on the right at the top of the stairs, with Lily's former art studio on the left. Sophie's room and the main bathroom were next, and at the end of the hall was the guest bedroom. Michael and Tom cleared out the guest room, removing unnecessary items to make space for Grace's belongings. They decided to place Grace's computer, bookshelf, and study desk in Lily's old studio. Tom offered to purchase a rug, blinds, and curtains for Grace's spaces since Michael would be busy with work and caring for Sophie. They also planned to install childproof gates on the stairs. On Monday, February 18th, Michael called Rachel to let her know that she should reach him on his cell for any emergencies. He also instructed her to leave any evening printing jobs for him, as long as David had other tasks to complete. The day went smoothly, with only a couple of brief calls from Rachel. At 3 p.m., Tom, Martha, and Grace arrived with enough of Grace's belongings for a 2-week stay. They helped her set up her room and settle in. Michael thanked them, kissed Sophie goodbye, and headed to the office. Once there, he called a meeting with Rachel and David to explain his new schedule. Michael outlined that he would arrive around 3 p.m., handle calls and meetings during business hours, and work on files and printing after 5 p.m., aiming to reduce David's overtime. Rachel and David had no issues with the plan, so they continued with their work. Michael worked through his files, took a break for a quick sandwich, and completed 2 small printing jobs by 9 p.m. He decided to head home early to check on how Grace was settling in. When he got home, the house was quiet. He found Grace in her study room, surrounded by school books and focused on her homework, dressed in her pajamas. Michael asked how things were going, and Grace mentioned that Sophie had been a bit fussy, but had otherwise been fine. She also asked for help with her math homework, which Michael gladly provided after freshening up. As they worked together, Michael noticed that Grace seemed more at ease around him, smiling more often, though she still blushed when their hands accidentally touched. Their bond was growing stronger. The rest of the week went smoothly as Michael and Grace settled into a routine. Michael prepared breakfast, Grace packed lunches and fed Sophie, and Michael took over caring for Sophie once Grace left for school. On 2 evenings, Michael finished work early and joined Grace for dinner, appreciating her cooking skills. On another evening, he stayed home longer so Grace could study for a test before he returned to the office and worked late. Their first weekend under the new arrangement also went well. Grace watched Sophie while Michael worked on Saturday afternoon, and Michael spent Saturday evening with Sophie while Grace went out with friends. On Sunday, Michael invited Tom and Martha over for dinner to discuss how the week had gone. They all agreed that everything had gone well and decided to make the arrangement permanent. Grace's remaining clothes would be brought over during the week, and Michael would arrange temporary guardianship papers so he could handle any school or emergency situations. They also planned to set up 2 bank accounts, one for Grace's wages and another for her clothing, incidentals, and allowance, funded by her parents. Tom and Martha were thrilled to start planning their travels in their motorhome, and they intended to prepare it during the coming week. They also decided to buy a dolly to tow their car, with the goal of leaving in 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks flew by as Michael and Grace refined their routines. One emergency arose when a major client needed an unexpected meeting with Michael. He asked his neighbor, Vicky Ellis, a 60-year-old widow, to babysit Sophie. Vicky enjoyed the experience and offered to help anytime, which eased Michael's concerns. Michael's business continued to thrive, and working in the evenings allowed him to avoid hiring additional staff. Rachel had become so capable that she rarely needed to call him at home. The pressure that had been weighing on Michael began to lift, and he started to enjoy life again. Since Lily's departure, Michael had been suppressing his emotions, both mentally and physically. As the one-month anniversary of her leaving approached, he found himself reminiscing about his first girlfriend from college, though Lily still occupied his thoughts daily. He began to accept life without her, realizing that he had much to live for, especially Sophie. He also started cutting back on his nightly bourbon habit, fearing it could become a crutch. On Sunday, March 10th, Tom and Martha joined Michael, Grace, and Sophie for dinner before they embarked on their motorhome trip. After the meal, they relaxed in the living room, talking and watching Sophie play. Martha expressed her frustration that Lily hadn't called since she left, and Tom added that he was also surprised. Michael admitted that it hurt more than he expected, but he was determined to move forward. Michael hadn't expected to hear from Lily, given the strict terms of their separation. During dinner, he asked if Grace had her driver's license, remembering that he'd seen her drive before. Tom confirmed that she did, but mentioned they would be taking their car on their trip. Michael offered to insure Lily's old car for Grace to use for school and errands, which both Tom and Grace appreciated. Grace eagerly agreed, promising to be careful. As the evening came to a close, Grace put Sophie to bed, planning to study afterward, while Martha and Tom prepared for their early departure. They said their goodbyes, promising to stay in touch regularly, and left excited for their new adventure. Michael and Grace waved them off from the front door. By Wednesday, March 27th, the past 2.5 weeks had flown by for Michael. He and Grace had settled into a comfortable routine, with Grace now using the car to handle most of the grocery shopping, usually on Saturdays while Michael watched Sophie. That morning, Grace had the chance to sleep in due to her morning classes being canceled for a teacher's meeting, so she asked Michael to get Sophie up, something that was usually her responsibility. After breakfast, Sophie began crying and looking around, and Michael hoped she would eventually stop missing her mother. Just then, Grace came downstairs in her pajamas, and Sophie immediately stopped crying when she saw her. Noticing this, Michael joked, "Looks like she's missing you, not Lily. You better not think about moving back home anytime soon." "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere," Grace replied with a smile as she picked up Sophie and headed back upstairs. On Thursday, April 4th, around 10 a.m., Michael had just finished reading to Sophie, who was now happily scribbling with a crayon in her high chair, when the doorbell rang. He made sure Sophie was secure before answering the door. He was surprised to find Lynn Harrison, one of Lily's longtime friends, standing there. "Hi, Lynn, long time no see," Michael greeted her. "Hi, Michael. I thought I'd stop by for some coffee." "Your office mentioned you've been working from home," Lynn replied. Michael invited her in, and they sat at the kitchen table with coffee. As usual, Lynn looked stylish in a snug white sweater that accentuated her curves. "So, Lynn, what's the real reason you're here?" Michael asked with a knowing smile. Lynn sighed and said, "I've been in touch with Lily. She knows she can't contact you directly, but she asked me to check in. She's not trying to stir things up again. She just wants a few photos of Sophie." "That's fine," Michael agreed. "I understand why she wants some pictures, though I hope it doesn't upset her too much." Lynn took a few shots of Sophie coloring and then mentioned, "I told Lily she was making a mistake by leaving. I even said that if my ex had been like you, I never would have divorced him." "Thanks for the support," Michael said, reflecting on how tough things had been. He explained that the early days had been hard, but that he had hired a helper to look after Sophie. Lynn seemed curious about the helper, but before Michael could explain, her phone rang. She had forgotten about a hair appointment and apologized before quickly snapping a few more photos, asking Michael to hold Sophie for some of them. She hurried out the door, mentioning that she'd let Lily know about the helper and would stop by again if Michael was okay with it. On Wednesday, May 1st, Tom and Martha returned from their trip, and Michael and Grace invited them over for dinner. They shared stories and photos from their travels, mentioning that they had met another couple with similar interests and were planning another trip together, starting on May 15th. Tom and Martha were excited about the upcoming journey, but were also eager to hear how things had gone at home. Michael reassured them that everything had been going smoothly. His business was busy, but he still made time to spend with Grace and Sophie. Grace was doing well in school, and Sophie was adjusting nicely, even taking her first steps and starting to say Dada and Baba. Her grandparents were thrilled. Grace then shared some news of her own. Her orthodontist had told her that her braces could come off in June, and she had decided to pursue a career in graphic design. Her parents encouraged her to keep an open mind until she finished high school, but they were supportive. Michael mentioned that his business might need a graphic designer in the future, and Grace joked that she could work for him someday. Later, Michael informed them that Lily had sent Lynn to take photos of Sophie, which they agreed was probably for the best. They also noted that they still hadn't heard directly from Lily. The week went by in a routine manner until Wednesday, when Michael received a call from his lawyer, Jim Watson. The divorce papers were finalized and would be official in 3 weeks. The news hit Michael hard, and instead of working, he spent the afternoon lying on his bed, thinking about Lily. The familiar ache in his chest returned. Later, Lynn called to arrange another visit to take more photos, but Michael asked her to wait until the following week. He wasn't ready to deal with anything related to Lily just yet. Monday, May 27th, marked the end of a tough month for Michael. The divorce had been finalized the previous week, and he had received the documents confirming it. After a short day at work, he confided in Rachel, who was concerned enough to call him at home later that evening. Michael retreated to his office with a glass of bourbon, trying to keep his emotions in check, but Grace found him crying. She comforted him, reminding him that he was strong and that Sophie needed him more than ever. Michael was still trying to come to terms with his new life, but he reminded himself that he still had Sophie and Grace to keep him grounded. The following Monday brought more difficult news. Grace returned home after stopping by her parents' house and found a message from Lily. With a hesitant voice, she told Michael that Lily had called to say she was marrying James Walker on Saturday and that they were leaving for Paris on Sunday. The news hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He turned pale, and tears welled up in his eyes. "Oh, God," he whispered, barely able to process the information. He thanked Grace for being there for Sophie, knowing he wouldn't be good company that night, and decided to head to the office to clear his mind. After Michael left, Grace quietly expressed her sympathy for him, wishing she could help him move on from Lily. She then called her parents to share the news. On Tuesday, June 11th, Michael waited for Grace to return from her final orthodontist appointment, hoping that getting her braces off would boost her confidence. When she arrived home, he greeted her with a smile. "Let's see that big smile you've been hiding," he teased. Grace flashed a wide grin, and Michael encouraged her to show it off more often, telling her she was beautiful. Touched by the compliment, Grace hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. Michael blushed in response. By Monday, July 1st, work had kept Michael busier than usual, so he hadn't joined Grace and Sophie for dinner as often as he would have liked. Determined to make the upcoming holiday weekend a special family time, he spent Saturday doing chores and cooking, encouraging Grace to go out with her friends that evening. Michael spent the night playing with Sophie, reading to her, and putting her to bed with lullabies. When Grace returned around 11:30 p.m., they stayed up together, watching Saturday Night Live and laughing at the sketches. On Sunday, they visited the local zoo with one of Grace's friends. Michael enjoyed watching the two girls have fun while he pushed Sophie in her stroller. They ended the day with dinner at a family restaurant, where Grace and her friend helped keep Sophie entertained. On Monday, they enjoyed a picnic at the park, where Grace brought another friend. While Sophie played, the two girls socialized with other friends, and later they all indulged in ice cream and watched the fireworks that night. After Sophie was asleep, Grace thanked Michael for the great weekend, hugged him, and headed to bed, leaving Michael with a warm smile. A week later, Tom and Martha returned from their trip and spent many weekends and evenings visiting with Michael, Grace, and Sophie. They shared stories and photos, enjoying their family time together. Michael adjusted his work schedule to spend more evenings with Sophie, giving Grace time to go out with her friends. Once a month, Lynn Harrison visited to take photos of Sophie, sending them to Lily in Paris. During one visit in July, Lynn hinted at her interest in Michael, suggesting that he should ask her out. Michael politely declined, saying he wasn't ready to date yet, but Lynn made it clear she wanted to be first in line when he was. In early August, Michael overheard Tom and Martha discussing what to get Grace for her birthday on August 17th. Realizing he needed to get her a gift as well, he began thinking about what to buy. On the morning of Grace's birthday, Saturday, August 17th, Michael woke up early to prepare a special breakfast. When Grace came downstairs, she was surprised to see a happy birthday Grace banner of festive tablecloth and candles on the table. "Good morning, birthday girl," Michael greeted her, serving her favorite blueberry pancakes that her mother had mentioned. Touched by the effort, Grace thanked him warmly. After breakfast, Michael gave her a card and a gift certificate for a day at Domenico's Beauty Spa. Grace was thrilled and hugged Michael tightly, though he gently pulled back, feeling a bit awkward. He kissed her on the forehead and wished her a happy birthday. Later, at her parents' house, Grace's mother teasingly pointed out that the spa package included a bikini wax, embarrassing Grace. The conversation soon shifted, and Grace eventually laughed it off. On Tuesday, September 10th, Grace started her senior year of high school, with her first class at 11 a.m. She spent the morning relaxing at home until she heard the doorbell and Michael greeting someone. Curious, she peeked downstairs and saw a well-dressed woman taking photos of Sophie. The woman flirtatiously touched Michael's chest and said, "I'll hold you to that next month for sure," followed by laughter. Feeling uneasy, Grace returned to her room, wondering who the woman was and why she acted that way with Michael. Later, she asked Michael about the visitor, and he explained that it was Lynn, a friend of Lily's who took monthly photos of Sophie. Still concerned, Grace left for school, deep in thought. On Wednesday, October 16th, it was an unusually warm fall day, and Michael was outside with Sophie, who was playing in the fenced front yard as part of her potty training. As they played, Michael heard the sound of a camera shutter and turned to see Lynn approaching. "Hello, Lynn. I didn't see you there. How are you?" Michael greeted her. "I'm good, but I'd be even better if you took me out for dinner this weekend." "How about it?" Lynn replied with a playful smile. Michael laughed and agreed, suggesting they go out on Saturday night. Lynn proposed dinner and dancing, which Michael accepted, joking that she'd have to pick the dance spot since it had been a while for him. Lynn teasingly suggested they could always dance at her place if they couldn't find a spot, then took a few more photos before leaving, reminding Michael to make reservations. That evening, Michael sat down for dinner with Grace and Sophie, and casually asked Grace if she could babysit on Saturday. He mentioned that he had plans to go out with Lynn, and Grace's smile quickly faded. She reluctantly agreed, but it was clear she wasn't thrilled about it. After Michael left for work, Grace, feeling emotional, talked to Sophie, expressing her worries that Michael might be getting serious about Lynn. Determined not to lose him, she decided to use the beauty spa gift certificate he'd given her and start working out more frequently. While Grace was at home, her thoughts tangled with worry. Michael was at the office, excited about the date and feeling ready to move forward from Lily. He made dinner reservations and tackled his work with a newfound energy. When he returned home later that night, Michael noticed the light in Grace's room was still on. Concerned, he went to check on her and saw that she had been crying. He asked if she was all right, and Grace shrugged it off, claiming it was just a tough day. Michael offered to talk if she ever needed to and mentioned that if she had other plans on Saturday, Mrs. Ellis could babysit. Grace reassured him that she was fine with babysitting. Before Michael left, Grace asked if she could start using the exercise equipment in the basement. Michael agreed, telling her to be cautious, especially with Sophie around. The next morning, Michael was surprised to see that Grace had already started using the equipment. She was just coming back from a workout, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts, and Michael couldn't help but notice how committed she was. "You're really putting me to shame," he joked. Grace simply smiled and said, "No time like the present," before heading upstairs to shower. On Saturday, October 19th, the day seemed to drag on as Michael eagerly awaited his evening date with Lynn. He noticed that Grace was unusually quiet and serious, so he asked again if she was okay with babysitting. She assured him that she didn't mind. By 5:30 p.m., Michael was ready to go. When he came downstairs, Grace complimented him, telling him he looked very handsome. Michael handed her a list of his evening's locations and contact numbers. As he left, he mentioned that he might be back late and told her not to wait up. After he walked out the door, Grace held Sophie close, fighting back tears. She quietly whispered to Sophie, "I really hope your dad doesn't fall for her." Sophie's playful babbling brought a slight smile to Grace's face. When Michael arrived at Lynn's place, she greeted him in a sleek black dress. Michael whistled in appreciation before they headed to La Meridienne for dinner. Seated in a cozy corner near the dance floor, they enjoyed drinks and light-hearted conversation. Lynn was surprised that Michael had asked her out, considering everything he had been through with Lily. Michael admitted he was still working through his feelings but was trying to move on. They shared a delicious meal and indulged in dessert, laughing and teasing each other. After dinner, they took to the dance floor, and as they moved together, Michael became more aware of their closeness. Any lingering worries about Lynn faded as they danced. But when a song that held special meaning for him and Lily began to play, Michael's mood shifted. Lynn noticed and playfully teased him, but Michael explained the significance of the song. They stepped away from the dance floor for a bit, but eventually they went back to dance some more. After midnight, they decided to call it a night. Outside, Lynn leaned in and kissed Michael passionately, and they continued kissing as they sat in the car. Back at Lynn's apartment, she invited him in for a drink, and they resumed kissing as soon as they were inside. After pouring some wine, they toasted to new beginnings and continued chatting. Lynn mentioned that she had told Lily about her plans to ask Michael out, but Lily hadn't responded. Michael suggested they steer clear of talking about Lily, as the memories were still painful. Lynn understood and led Michael to her bedroom. With a flick of her hand, she dimmed the lights, then slowly unzipped her dress, letting it fall to the floor. "So what do you think?" she asked, giving him a playful twirl. "You look incredible," Michael responded, captivated by her confidence. They soon became intimate, enjoying each other's company. Afterward, they showered together, wrapping up the evening on a high note. Lynn wanted Michael to stay the night, but he knew he had to get home since he hadn't informed Grace that he might be out late. At 2:30 a.m., he kissed Lynn goodbye at her door. She playfully suggested they do it again sometime soon. Michael chuckled and agreed. "It wouldn't take much to convince me." When he got home, he decided not to use the garage, worried the noise might wake Grace. As he walked up to the house, he noticed her peering out from her bedroom window. Concerned, he went upstairs, knocked on Grace's door, and asked if everything was all right since she was still awake. She replied that everything was fine, but Michael could sense something was off. He asked if he could come in, and when she agreed, he saw that she had been crying. Gently, he asked what was bothering her. Grace hesitated before asking if he was in love with Lynn and whether she was planning to move in. She admitted she didn't want to leave him and Sophie. Shocked, Michael reassured her that he wasn't in love with Lynn. They were just having fun, and he had no intentions of moving her in. He added that he wanted Grace to stay at least until Sophie started school, as Sophie had grown very attached to her. Relieved, Grace smiled and thanked him, confessing that she had been scared of being sent away. Michael gently touched her shoulder and told her not to worry about that. He then said goodnight and reminded her that they both needed to get some rest before Sophie woke up. Grace lay awake for a while, her mind filled with thoughts, but eventually, she drifted off to sleep with a small smile on her face. On Wednesday, October 23rd, as Michael was getting ready to leave for work, Grace returned home from school, grinning. She asked if he had any plans for November 16th, and when he said no, she revealed that she had made dinner reservations for his birthday and arranged for Mrs. Ellis to babysit Sophie. On Saturday, November 16th, Michael started his day with a mix of anticipation and curiosity, though Grace had already been up early working out. She reminded him to be ready by 6 p.m. for their special dinner plans. After Grace went upstairs, Michael took a moment to reflect on how well things were going. His business was booming. He had recently hired another printer, invested in more equipment, and Mary, his office manager, was excelling in her role. She had even suggested hiring a part-time graphic design student, which had significantly improved their work quality. Michael had gone out with Lynn again the previous weekend, and they had spent another night together. He noticed that Grace seemed a bit distant for a couple of days afterward, but by Tuesday, she had returned to her usual self. Meanwhile, Sophie was growing up fast, learning new words every day and proudly showing off her progress in potty training. Her grandparents were equally impressed with her development. Grace had left the house before 9 a.m., so Michael spent the day with Sophie, reading her favorite books until she napped. While she slept, Michael caught up on some office work. Later, after taking Sophie for a walk, he noticed that Grace's car was back. Mrs. Ellis arrived at 4:30 p.m. to babysit Sophie, and after making sure she had everything she needed, Michael went upstairs to get ready for his dinner with Grace. At 5:30 p.m., Michael was downstairs when Grace appeared. Mrs. Ellis exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, Grace, just look at you." Michael turned and immediately understood why. Grace's usual ponytail was gone, replaced by a chic haircut with highlights. Her makeup was flawless, and she had clearly had a manicure. She wore a black dress with a knee-length skirt and spaghetti straps, carrying a matching purse. "Grace, you look stunning," Michael said, taken aback. "You've gone from 17 to 21 since this morning." "Thank you, Michael. I used your gift certificate. It was time for a change, and this made it possible," Grace replied, grinning from ear to ear. Mrs. Ellis turned Grace around so Michael could see the full transformation. "Grace, you've really grown from a girl into a young woman," she added. Blushing but smiling, Grace took Michael's arm and asked, "Well, Mrs. Ellis, do we look like a couple?" "You sure do," Mrs. Ellis responded. "We need a picture." Michael retrieved his camera, and Mrs. Ellis took several photos of them. Then it was time to leave. Michael helped Grace into the car, and as they drove off, he asked, "So, where are we going?" "I reserved a table at La Meridienne. I figured it must be good since you took Lynn there," Grace replied with a knowing smile. "You seem to know Mrs. Ellis pretty well," Michael remarked. "She comes over sometimes when you're at work. We talk a lot. She's really nice," Grace explained. At La Meridienne, they were seated quickly. Michael couldn't help but notice how much Grace had matured, not just in appearance but also in confidence. Shortly after they sat down, the waitress asked for their drink orders and mistakenly assumed Grace was Michael's wife. Grace, grinning, ordered a Coke, and Michael chuckled at the mix-up. Their meal was delicious, and their conversation was deeper than usual. They decided to share a dessert, and by the time they finished, the band had started playing. Michael noticed Grace watching the dancers, so he asked if she wanted to dance. "I'd love to," Grace said, mentioning that her dad had taught her to slow dance. They danced 3 songs together before the music picked up speed. Grace was a smooth, confident dancer, and Michael enjoyed their time on the dance floor. They danced 5 more slow songs throughout the night, thoroughly enjoying themselves. Afterward, as they returned to the car, Grace looked radiant, and Michael couldn't stop smiling. When they pulled into the garage, Grace turned to him and said, "There's one last thing I want to give you for your birthday." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. Though brief, the kiss left Michael momentarily speechless. Grace then got out of the car, and Michael hurried around to help her inside. Back home, they chatted with Mrs. Ellis about their evening while having coffee. After Mrs. Ellis left, Michael took Grace's hands and thanked her for a wonderful evening, telling her it was the best birthday he'd had in years. They went upstairs together, and as Michael stopped at his bedroom door, Grace waved and said, "Good night." "Good night, Grace," Michael replied as she entered her room. Though he went to bed, Michael stayed awake for another hour, replaying the evening in his mind. On Tuesday, December 31st, at 7 p.m., Michael was waiting for Grace to get ready for their New Year's Eve outing with her parents. Tom and Martha had returned home on the 15th, and the group had spent a lot of time together over Christmas. The 4 adults were heading to a New Year's Eve party at the La Meridienne Ballroom, with Mrs. Ellis babysitting Sophie. Grace had volunteered to be the designated driver, so Michael poured himself a small scotch while waiting. As he sipped, he reflected on the past 2 weeks. Tom and Martha were amazed at how much Grace had changed during their trip. Her new hairstyle and confidence made her seem like a completely different person. Michael had been busy as his business continued to grow, but he was looking forward to a slower pace after the new year. He had given his employees reduced hours between Christmas and New Year's so they could enjoy some extra time off. Christmas had been a pleasant celebration with Grace's parents, filled with fun moments like when Martha and Grace kept catching Michael under the mistletoe. Tom and Martha had decided to attend a New Year's Eve party and insisted that Michael and Grace join them. At 8 p.m., they were all ready to head out for a night of celebration. After Mrs. Ellis arrived to babysit, Michael and Grace headed out to pick up her parents for the New Year's Eve party. At the event, they met another couple, Pat and Sylvia, friends of Michael's. The three couples spent the evening dancing, chatting, and enjoying each other's company. Grace especially loved being part of the adult group, dancing with Michael, her father, or Pat throughout the night. As midnight approached, Grace made sure Michael was on the dance floor with her. As they swayed together and the countdown began, she leaned in and whispered, "This has been the best year of my life." Michael smiled softly, replying, "This year started off rough, but it's ending so much better. I've loved having you in my home. Sophie adores you like a mother." Grace's eyes softened, and she responded warmly, "That's so sweet, Michael. I couldn't love her more if she were my own." They continued dancing as the countdown ended, and when the new year was celebrated with cheers, Michael gave Grace a quick kiss on the cheek and said, "Happy New Year, Grace." "Happy New Year," she replied, just as Tom and Martha joined them with their New Year's wishes. Soon after, Tom took Grace for another dance. As they moved across the floor, Tom gently said, "Your mother and I can see how close you've gotten with Michael. Just remember, he's been through a lot. Be careful with his feelings and don't rush into anything. You've got your whole life ahead of you." Grace nodded, smiling at her father. "I know, Daddy. I really do care about him, but I'll wait before making any big decisions. I promise." They left the party shortly after, with Grace driving them all home. Later that night, in her room, Grace reflected on her father's advice. She knew he was right, but that didn't make waiting any easier. It took her a long time to fall asleep, her mind filled with thoughts of Michael and what their future might hold. On Saturday, March 15th, a warm, sunny day, Grace went grocery shopping while Mrs. Ellis visited Michael and Sophie. Mrs. Ellis offered to take Sophie for a walk, and Michael helped get Sophie ready, knowing Mrs. Ellis would probably end up carrying her after a short distance. As Michael finished his coffee, he decided to step outside to see if they were on their way back. When he did, he saw Lynn Harrison had met up with them and was snapping pictures. Lynn called out, "I can't stay. I have a house showing nearby. I saw Sophie and thought I'd grab some photos for Lily. I'll call you later in the week." Her last shot was of Sophie and Mrs. Ellis standing hand in hand on the sidewalk, with Michael watching from the doorway. As Lynn drove off, they all waved goodbye. On Saturday, May 17th, Michael prepared for an evening out with Lynn at a lively bar they had discovered a few months ago. They enjoyed the place for its good dance music and energetic atmosphere. Grace was also going out with friends, and Mrs. Ellis was set to babysit. Michael had noticed that Grace's social life had become more active since the new year, though it seemed she was spending time with different people each weekend. He was relieved she wasn't getting serious with anyone, as he had felt a twinge of protectiveness when she first started going out more. This year, Michael began to see Grace differently, especially after their New Year's party and the dinner at La Meridienne with her parents. He even wondered if she might have a crush on him, though he knew she was still young. Nevertheless, her attention had been a balm for his wounded self-esteem after Lily left. Recently, however, Grace had seemed a bit distant, and Michael hoped she wasn't losing interest in her role as Sophie's nanny. As Michael was leaving for his evening with Lynn, he met Grace's friend at the door, a nervous-looking teenage boy who seemed flustered when Michael asked him not to keep Grace out too late. Michael then picked up Lynn, and they spent a pleasant evening dancing and talking before heading back to Lynn's apartment for coffee. While waiting for the coffee to brew, Michael and Lynn shared a tender moment and talked about their lives. Eventually, Lynn revealed that she had met someone new, Mark Arnold, and wanted to pursue a serious relationship with him. Michael agreed that their connection had been more friendly than romantic, and they both acknowledged that it was time to move on. The next morning, Sunday, May 18th, Michael was having coffee when Grace, fresh from a workout, joined him at the table. She asked about his evening, and Michael shared that Lynn had met someone else, so they wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. Grace seemed relieved, glad that Lynn hadn't hurt Michael like Lily had. After finishing her juice, Grace headed upstairs, clearly pleased, while Michael remained at the table, watching her go. On Saturday, June 21st, Grace graduated from high school, and her parents, Michael and Sophie, attended the ceremony. Grace was thrilled to receive an unexpected award for being the third best student in her class. She credited Michael for helping her succeed in math and made sure to get pictures with him and Sophie. As they posed for photos, Michael began to see Grace as more than just a schoolgirl. She was now a young woman. He wondered if she would continue living in his house while attending university. As he reflected on his life, Michael realized how much had changed since his divorce from Lily. He hoped that Grace would still be part of his future, and not just a memory he would ponder over during a late-night drink. On Sunday, August 17th, Grace celebrated her 18th birthday while traveling in Minnesota with her parents, leaving Michael and Sophie behind. Before leaving, Grace had been concerned about Sophie's care, but Michael reassured her that Mrs. Ellis would be there to help. After just 2 days, both Michael and Sophie already missed Grace, with Sophie especially fussy and insisting that only Grace could care for her. However, she eventually settled with Mrs. Ellis's help, allowing Michael to focus on his growing business, which had recently secured a major contract, keeping his staff busy and increasing his own workload. Michael had gifted Grace a laptop before she left for university, along with a bouquet of roses, which she appreciated. As the week went on, Michael found himself missing their morning workout sessions together, though he continued them, noticing positive changes in his physique. As the week progressed, Michael found himself missing his morning workout sessions with Grace, though he continued them alone, noticing positive changes in his physique. On Thursday, he invited Lynn over for coffee. She took some photos of Sophie before they settled on the patio for a chat. Lynn mentioned how her relationship with Mark was going well, although Mark still felt insecure about her past friendship with Michael. They agreed that Michael would continue sending monthly photos of Sophie to help ease Mark's concerns. They also discussed how Lynn had been hearing less from Lily, who hinted at feeling misled by James, though she didn't go into specifics. Michael felt that Lily's influence on him was finally fading, as his focus shifted more towards Sophie and his expanding business. On October 8th, Grace returned home from university and found Michael waiting to catch up over coffee. She excitedly shared an online discovery, a Parisian newspaper featuring a photo of Lily with her husband and assistant, standing beside a painting titled Amanda and Her Nanny. The painting depicted Sophie with Mrs. Ellis, and a shadowy figure in the background that seemed to represent Michael. Another figure, a woman dressed in black, was facing away from the viewer. Grace found the painting puzzling, but Michael speculated that the woman in black might represent Lily and that the painting conveyed a sense of loss or regret. They concluded that Lily likely used a photograph and replaced Grace with Mrs. Ellis as the nanny. Michael printed copies of the painting, planning to give one to Mrs. Ellis, and then enjoyed a relaxing coffee with Grace. They talked about her university experience, and Grace admitted that while the transition had been challenging at first, she was now feeling more confident and excited about the upcoming semester. Michael encouraged her, expressing confidence that she would continue to do well. On Saturday, November 15th, Grace asked Michael to keep his evening free as she had made plans for his birthday. She had arranged a dinner reservation at La Meridienne, where they had celebrated his last birthday, and Michael eagerly anticipated the evening. At 5 p.m., Mrs. Ellis arrived to babysit Sophie, and Michael got ready in a new suit, pleased with how fit he looked after losing nearly 20 pounds. When he went downstairs, he was struck by how beautiful Grace looked in her green satin dress. He complimented her and admired her new hairstyle. As they left for dinner, Grace took Michael's hand, and they walked to the car, feeling in natural comfort with each other. During the drive, they chatted about her university classes. At La Meridienne, they enjoyed a leisurely meal in a private alcove. Michael noticed other patrons admiring Grace and asked if she had noticed too. She laughed, replying, "People always do." After dinner, they danced to slow songs, with Grace holding Michael close, a new level of closeness between them. As they danced, Michael felt a mix of emotions but kept his feelings in check. By midnight, they decided to head home, walking hand in hand. During the drive, Grace undid her seatbelt and leaned against Michael, reminiscent of how her parents used to do on drives. When they arrived home, Grace kissed Michael softly, a kiss that felt different from their usual interactions. Inside, Michael thanked her for the wonderful evening, but Grace hinted that she didn't want the night to end yet. She led him upstairs, expressing her desire to deepen their relationship. Michael hesitated, concerned about their age difference and her parents' potential reaction. But Grace reassured him that she was mature enough to make her own decisions. They shared their feelings for each other, with Grace expressing her affection, and Michael admitting that he had been developing feelings for her over time. They spent the night together, and the next morning they shared a quiet breakfast before Sophie joined them. On Saturday, April 24th, Michael enjoyed a spring afternoon watching hockey after spending the morning catching up on bookkeeping at the office. His days were usually busy managing payroll and accounting for his 7 employees. He typically worked in the evenings so he could spend the daytime with Sophie, while Grace took care of her in the evenings, sometimes with help from Mrs. Ellis. It was hard to believe it had been nearly 2 years since his divorce from Lily, and so much had changed in that time. As Michael was watching the game, the doorbell rang. Expecting a salesperson, he was surprised to see Lynn at the door. She explained that she was engaged and had been away on a cruise, which was why she hadn't returned his calls. But her visit wasn't about her engagement. It was about Lily, who had returned to town and wanted to see him and Sophie. After considering it, Michael agreed to meet with her. Lynn brought Lily inside, and Michael noticed how different she looked, thinner, with shorter hair. After some small talk, Lily began to open up, explaining that leaving Michael had been a mistake. She had discovered that James, the man she had left Michael for, had deceived her. He had been married twice before, and his behavior was similar to his past, which deeply hurt Lily. As Lily shared her regrets, the door opened, and Sophie, excited about getting ice cream, ran into the room. Michael introduced Sophie to Lily, who became emotional as they shared a brief hug. Just then, Grace entered the room, and Lily was shocked to see her younger sister there, now grown up and confident. Grace explained that she had been living with Michael and Sophie while their parents were traveling. The situation took another turn when Michael revealed that Grace had legally adopted Sophie and that they had recently married during a trip to Las Vegas. Stunned, Lily left the house in disbelief, with Lynn following to comfort her. After helping Lily to the car, Lynn returned to the house, concerned about Lily's state. Michael assured Lynn that they would support Lily and help her get back on her feet. As Lily left, visibly upset, Michael and Grace stood together, with Sophie asking why her first mommy was crying. Grace gently explained that Lily was sad, but reassured Sophie that they would make sure she was okay.